The plant
All right, good morning, Still Earth. This is Adam Sturch broadcasting from the Mushroom Mansion, Taos, New Mexico, working on oil painting Thoughtless. All right, just continuing translucent color layering with smaller brushstrokes, progressively smaller brushstrokes is what will happen to make the rhythms in the painting more elaborate and smooth and detailed. But I'm starting with a magenta pink and a bluish deep purple, and we'll see where we go from there.
Once you get into the New World tropics, then you are in the great domain of the hallucinogenic plants. And no one knows why it is that the tropics of the New World are tremendously rich in hallucinogens. I mean, I don't know how many of you are botanists or biologists, but try to imagine figuring out a set of evolutionary constraints that were operating on one side of the planet but not on the other. You know, when we take, for instance, the jungles of southern Colombia and compare them with, let us say, the jungles of New Guinea, these are both continental floras, both equatorial, both climaxed at a species-rich climax, and one has dozens of hallucinogens in it, and the other has none. None. This is not well understood. I mean, theories range as wildly as, obviously, that South America must be where the flying saucer landed. And, you know, that's where the genes were seeded. I confess I'm not sure why it is. At first I thought that it had to do with the extremely primitive state, so-called primitive, the extremely archaic state of culture in the South American jungles, that they represent a real Stone Age culture, where when you go into Indonesia, it may look primitive to you, but the Dutch were there before the English arrived in North America. It has had centuries and centuries in which these things could be forgotten. But of course, then come the botanists who care nothing for ethnographic data and who simply carry out plant surveys and chemical analysis of plants. They can't find these hallucinogens either. So this is a great mystery. In the tropics of Mesoamerica and the equatorial tropics of the New World, there's a vast panoply of hallucinogens, not only the mushroom complex, but then also this ayahuasca or yahe complex that we've referred to several times. This is a huge jungle vine. And as we cross into the yahe area, we also cross an interesting barrier, because we move from plants, single plants, which are hallucinogenically active, into the realm of preparations. We're on the threshold of the concept drug here, because what ayahuasca is two plants which are not active unless brought into combination with each other. One plant contains a monoamine oxidase inhibitor, and the other plant contains DMT, which would be destroyed in the gut if taken orally, unless it were taken orally in the presence of an MAO inhibitor. Well, this was not understood by Western pharmacology until 1956, but it was understood by Amazonian shamans millennia ago. So they bring these two things together, and by varying the ratio between the plant containing the beta-carbolines that inhibit MAO and the plants that contain DMT, they can intensify or de-emphasize the visions. Well, most of the hallucinogens in the Amazon basin run on tryptamine of some sort, usually DMT. In the upper basin, of Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, like that, you get these yahe ayahuasca beverages. These are things you drink, and then it comes on. You have these outlandish trips. As you go down into the lower basin, the Banisteriopsis cult gives way to these snuff cults, Ibina and Niopo, depending on the languages. These don't depend on an MAO inhibitor for their activity because they're absorbed through the subnasal mucosa, which is an extremely effective way for getting drugs into the system. The problem with that complex, the snuff complex, is that we are just physically such delicate and wimpy people that we can't stand that route of drug administration, because what they do is they toast these seeds of Anodonanthera peregrina, this huge leguminous tree, which is the source of the seeds. They toast these seeds and powder them, so what you get is a kind of rough cross between sawdust and charcoal, and then they have a hollow tube about this long, and they load it up with this stuff, and you squat down and put the tube into your nostril, and your friend, not you, because you would not do it hard enough. Your friend then takes a huge breath of air, and it's just like being hit in the face with a 2x4. I mean, it's like being hit in the face. And you fall over backwards, you scream, you salivate, you squirm around there in the dirt for a minute or two. And then you sit back up, and by that time, the tube has been reloaded for the other nostril. And then, in your eyes, your sinuses can't believe what's happening to you. So you have to sort out this whole sinus shock, which is going on in parallel with then an evolving strange state of mind, which is beginning to take over and clarify everything. And then there are numerous minor variations on these themes. Might talk just a little bit about the chemistry of these things and the chemistry of hallucinogens generally. My attitude toward this question of plants, compounds, drugs, should these things be used for spiritual growth? If the answer is no, then that finishes. You don't have to go any further. If the answer is maybe or yes, then other questions arise. Which compounds out of this whole survey, and at what frequency, and at what dosage, and under what circumstances? And over the years, I've sort of evolved a three-way test that I will share with you, because I think it's maybe operationally the most useful thing you'll hear this weekend. And that is, if you are contemplating some compound, some plant, then the first thing to ask yourself is, does it occur in nature? Does it have some tangentiality to what is already existing? Because obviously what exists, that's nature, has undergone some vast winnowing process out of the set of all things which might exist. In that wonderful phrase of Alfred North Whitehead's, certain things have undergone the formality of actually occurring. And so certain compounds have undergone the formality of actually occurring in the biological matrix, and so they should be our pool out of which our experimental compounds should be drawn. But this is thousands of compounds. How can we further narrow it? Well, an excellent way of narrowing it further is to ask the question of this compound: does it have a history of human usage? Does it have a history of human usage? That is your FDA approval. Because if you can point to a tribe of people who have been taking this plant or mushroom or whatever it is for millennia, and they don't have miscarriages, tumors, cataracts, blindness, Down syndrome, 8 fingers on the left hand, or whatever it is, then you can be fairly confident that this thing is benign, that these people have observed its action on pregnant women, the elderly, those with, and that it has passed that test. Then, finally, the narrowest gate through which a compound has to go to intersect my precious body is it has to have an affinity to ordinary brain chemistry. It has to have an affinity to ordinary brain chemistry. We don't want to launch something on your brain that it can't recognize at all, that it has no biosynthetic pathways to degrade, that it has no receptors for just some crazy thing, 5-amino-3-triethylphenthylanaxidine or something. We don't want that. That's not the spirit that we're acting in here. So if the compound can get through those 3 barriers, then it's an excellent candidate for providing spiritual gain at low physiological impact. Well, now some people may say, oh, well, you've taken all the fun out of it. All the good things have been tossed aside in this mad rush to purity. Not at all. The very best stuff was retained in this process because in terms of relative strength and bizarreness of effect and so forth, the strangest, the most powerful, the most transformative of all hallucinogens in nature or out is dimethyltryptamine, DMT. And it's worth talking about DMT for a moment because it will raise certain issues and distinctions that you may not have been aware of. First of all, DMT is hands down the most powerful of all hallucinogens. I mean, it is so powerful that whatever's in second place is lost over the horizon. Yet, it is the most benign of all hallucinogens because it occurs as an endogenous neurotransmitter in the normal human brain. Every single one of us at this moment have N,N-dimethyltryptamine being synthesized, activated, and degraded in our synaptic membrane. So this is almost a paradox. The most benign of all hallucinogens, the most fast-acting, I should also add, is also the most harmless, the easiest to take. It sort of puts a certain obligation on the experient because there is no reason to hold back except that there is this question, does it drive you mad? And then the more serious version of that question, well, what about the possibility of death by astonishment? This is no joke. Death by astonishment is, I think, probably the major risk we run with this stuff because the impact of the breakthrough is so total, so complete, so unexpected. And in a way, this sort of brings me back around to my theme because I encountered DMT, LSD, all of these things in that very period when I was getting set to take flight as a Jungian analyst. And what completely blew my mind about DMT, and I mention it again, here's an opportunity for research, is how here's a heretical construction, how trans-archetypal the content of the flash seemed. I was appalled because not only had I a certain amount of interest in Jung and proclivity along those lines, but my original major had been art history. Art historians, what we're trained to do is to be able to look at a motif and say, oh yes, I'm familiar with this from ceramic from second millennia Peru, and also Mandaean embroidery work. We know motifs. We're trained to recognize and connect disparate aesthetic domains. Well, when I smoked DMT and came down, I said, this is not on the map. I can't believe it, that this doesn't connect up to anything. How can there be domains of the human mind that do not announce themselves in folklore, fairy tales, dreams, or mandala painting, that are so removed from the then of what is human that they are apparently not accessible in structuring our maps of ourself and our psyche. And that for me was the contact with what I call, and I didn't call it this, Rudolf Otto called it this, and this term influenced Jung, Otto preceded Jung, it is the wholly other. And if there is an archetype of the wholly other, then this is it. But perhaps the wholly other transcends the archetypes. This may explain to some degree Jung's interest in Gnosticism, especially the Valentinian school of Gnosticism, which holds, that there is a higher and hidden Father, all God, who is outside the machinery of cosmic fate. And it seemed to me that in those extremely profound DMT flashes, I was actually witnessing a domain outside the machinery of the archetypes, which is, for us as moderns, that's what the machinery of fate is. It's not zodiacal machinery. It's hardwiring in our psychology and our genes that gives us our fate. Well, so having said that, I've not only made the survey, but also brought us to, by ending with DMT, the subject matter of this quest. And I want to make it clear, I speak about the power of the psychedelic experience because I think people should be informed of their birthright. And I feel very antsy around the notion that someone might go from birth to the grave without ever having a psychedelic experience. It makes me as antsy as the notion that somebody might go from birth to the grave without having a sexual experience. It's a strange kind of protective denial, or a kind of expression of fear. This is our birthright. This is part of what it means to be human. These altered states of consciousness, I think, are pretty much scripted into the existence of women because most of them will give birth, which is an organically scripted psychedelic experience from which there is no escape unless, of course, you go for the drug knockout, the spinal, and then you miss everything. But biologically, physiologically, women are set up for this experience. Men are not. It's possible to build such barriers against overwhelmment, but it never happens in your whole life. And I believe that if we psychologically analyze the effects of these psychedelics, what they do is they dissolve boundaries. That's all. I mean, if you interview 10,000 people who've had a psychedelic trip, each one has their own hierophany, their own hieroskamos that unfolded for them. But the sum total of it is boundaries dissolve. And then whatever's on the other side of your boundary comes flooding in to claim you and to reshape and remake your psyche. Well, I see the entire illness of our civilization as an ego-inflationary illness. We have gone so sick.
All right, I'm liking that. It's getting deeper, richer, more varied and detailed.
Murdering the planet rather
Some fun
than
blending happening with those pinks and purples and yesterday's
psychic
colors as well.
imbalance.
Zoom in a little
And
bit, pan
the
around some.
psychedelics act to redress this. They are almost an inoculation.
Thinking of mixing up a bright light color
the
of some
ego.
kind and doing another round and extending this session into a double.
Arising in historical
But then again, it's
time.
getting pretty
Or
saturated.
rather, actually, history is
Might
caused by
ought
the
to
ego.
let it dry.
But the ego is a component of the psyche that
Pick it up later, work on
arose
something else.
in the post-archaic phase, in the post-psychedelic phase. It's entirely a modern invention. It's less than 15,000 years old. And the assumptions of the ego are the source of our neurosis, our disequilibrium. Why did the ego arise?
Alright,
It arose
am I going to do any more right now? No, I don't think so. It's pretty wet, so I'm going to let it dry. And pick it up probably tomorrow or the next day with a yet more refined layer of detail, glazing.
In other words, here is the scenario as I
But as you can
see
see, it's starting to get some character now. So thanks for watching. That's Adam Sturch broadcasting from the Mushroom Mansion, Taos, New Mexico, working on oil painting, Thoughtless.
non-advanced
Have a good day,
primates, like squirrel monkeys.